A couple weeks ago, the media reported on a cyber incident regarding the U.S. military. The hacker compromised the base network, found information on the MQ-9 Reaper drone, posted in a forum on the dark web seeking buyers for maintenance documents about the Reaper, basically a remotely controlled aerial recon and weapons platform, not just any simple UAV. With the disclosure of this incident, a known 2-year-old flaw in a Netgear router was used to gain access to the system that contained the documents. This is one of the most valuable weapon platforms in our U.S. military. The stakes are extremely high, and this is what the adversaries are successfully obtaining. Think about when you go through this presentation, what you might not know about the network, about the applications, what information is supposed to be protected, and how to go about to secure it. Most agencies and customers that I've had conversations and meetings with simply don't know everything about the networks, or what we like to say on the offensive side, the attack surface. Let's just take a moment here to talk about the agenda. So I'm going to be talking about what is a vulnerability assessment, and then what is penetration testing, a comparison of the two, vulnerability assessment versus penetration test, how do they stack up, the evolution of testing, especially in 2018, the best of both worlds, and a section that will take questions and answers at the end of this. So they must be the same, right? In fact, they're not. It all comes down to a status of infrastructure versus call to action. So let me just take a little bit of context here. A lot of times I come into places and they basically think it's the same thing. And a lot of times people actually use these two different terminologies interchangeably. So let me give you a real-world example. I visited a university hospital a few years ago to help install 2 different tool sets for staff. When I got there, we had to take a step back and not actually install what we came for. Instead, I was introduced to leadership of the staff, which apparently comprised of 1 primary person and 1 part-time person for backup. They didn't know what they needed. They didn't know what type of tools the 2-person team needed. They literally thought that we were just there to sell them another tool that they didn't need. After explaining the process of vulnerability assessment and pen testing, the leadership was on board and let us install and train their staff on how to get smarter and more efficient with their limited people within their company. Apparently, they got this impression from the third-party auditor. Because they were under HIPAA regulations, the auditor came in, required by law, and ran 1 single assessment and claimed they did both vulnerability assessment and pen testing at the same time with 1 exact report. So that's where they got some of the confusion. So what is a vulnerability assessment? Basically, in this marketplace, it's 2 different viewpoints of how to define what is an assessment. One is a systematic technical approach, really locating the security loopholes in a network or system and being able to scale and provide coverage as your network is getting larger and more application surface is growing, and estimate the susceptibility of the network to different vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of tools out there that give great dashboards now, and they give great metrics, and they even have distinct reports for management with just pie charts and trend graphs to show if you're doing better or worse during the process of defining and closing vulnerabilities. And second is really a lot of people think vulnerability assessment is a machine-based solution. Literally, they buy an off-the-shelf security scanner or use an open source scanner like something like Burp Suite or Nmap, and basically they let it go off and query a set of hosts or a specific range of IP addresses to find known vulnerabilities. The issue in this marketplace, especially for vulnerability assessment, is scanners have different strengths. Some have excellent capabilities to find vulnerabilities and report only the stated vulnerabilities. Other scanners have good capabilities of finding vulnerabilities, not every single one of them, but their strength more comes into play of remediation, of having just a better report to explain the finding of the vulnerability, the ranking and the severity, why it's found as vulnerable, and some scanners now take basic screenshots of the system. So how does the assessment actually work, right? Why do I break this down into 3 steps? Well, this is basically the process of going through an assessment. Conducting the assessment, identifying the exposures, and then addressing the exposures that are found. What do I mean by this? Well, I can tell you from both selling and running some vulnerability scanners and using them for my personal use and for just being on the ground for federal agencies and different corporations, each step requires different planning and information gathering and coordination, especially with different teams involved. For example, I went on site to a federal bank. Their network was far larger than they thought it was. During the pilot of basically testing out the scanner technology, we ran it just in a discovery mode, which means just getting a viewpoint of the IP infrastructure, which IPs are actually active. And then when we got the results back, into different plans about conducting the assessment across different divisions within their external network, their partner network, the VPN network, the employee network, the customer network, the transaction network, and the PCI network. So planning is a very good step process of how to conduct the assessment, what's really out there. And then when you actually see what's out there, you start contacting other teams to get system information, what's applications that are out there, can we actually work with the application owners to acquire some basic knowledge of the applications, some of their configurations, and collecting credentials, which I'll get into in the next slide. Then we work on identifying the exposures, right? So the scanners typically bring in a huge set of information, sometimes thousands of pages of results. It's mostly for information gathering, but also prioritized vulnerabilities only on usually one universal ranking score, which is CVSS, which is a NIST standard that our federal government has come up with to standardize ranking of low, medium, high, and sometimes critical vulnerabilities. So with the identification of the reporting that comes out from the scanners, different vendors and different tools have metrics and dashboards, like I mentioned, to help. But when the information is gathered, sometimes it's just too much of an information overload without any context. In my experience, this is where it actually breaks down, which is going to the third step, addressing the exposures. So the vulnerabilities that are found, security teams tend to need to go and take the report and provide some sort of context to the system owners on how to actually fix them. But in the real world, when I've gone to several agencies, all that really happens is a report is given to a system owner or a group of business owners, and they're left to basically look through the report and highlight exactly what they need to do. And a lot of times the report is missing that information. They don't know how long it's going to take to configure a system. Is it the right configuration? Maybe the report just says patch. Well, what patch level? They'll have to go through and make sure that their systems will be running correctly after a patch upgrades the actual operating system as well, how long that would take. Is there basic system configuration changes that are necessary that might break their application from their users accessing it? So there's a lot of communication that has to go between these three steps. Now, a lot of times when I come into environments, they get really scared. What are you going to do to my network? You're going to scan what? That's usually the number one question, right? Is how are you going to scan it? How long the scan is going to take place? And then what am I going to get from that? So in the marketplace today, there's three primary ways to scan the network. There's network scanning, there's authenticated scanning, and there's passive scanning. So network scanning is literally what I talked about when I went to the federal bank, is getting a list of systems, the network ports that are active, and what systems are currently just connected when you see them when the scan window takes place. Then you have the second area, which is authenticated scanning. So you know more about your application environment, and you talk to the system owners, and you want to get a viewpoint of all their application inventory. That's where you basically collect credentials and other information to basically have the scanner log into the system remotely especially on your endpoints, your desktops, your workstations, your mobile devices, to basically get an asset inventory together of exactly what's running out there, what level patches they are at, and getting a better picture of exactly what's within the infrastructure to get a really realistic view of the entire enterprise. And then there's the other obstacles, right? So there's passive scanning, which is an advanced sniffer that has another set of signatures that looks through packets and basically guesses what systems are running on the network. So years ago, when I was working for a specific consulting group, I went to a federal agency that had more than 300,000 active systems worldwide. And what they wanted to do was scan all of the systems all at once. So basically figure out how long it actually took to scan their network environment. So during that time, when I worked for this particular contracting company, we were going to be releasing a new build of our scanner. And what we did was we initially took the current version and we scanned for the 300,000 plus IP addresses in the range. And then we basically went through and we determined that it took nearly 3 days to cover the entire footprint of the enterprise. Well, that was way too long, right? So during the planning and the conducting of the assessment phase, they didn't want a 3-day window of scanning. It was just too long. Was we gave them access to the beta build of scanner that had far better network topology scanning. So over the weekend, we decided to scan the entire enterprise once again with the new beta build, and then we hoped that it would be finished by the weekend that was finished. After 3 days, the scan was complete. So there we have it, right? So 3 different ways of scanning, and then you can basically fine-tune the scanners as you go along. As you know the environment, you get more awareness of what's really out there. So the basics of scanners is that they are really good at finding known vulnerabilities, but what they're not really good at is finding the unknown vulnerabilities. Because I've personally worked at 3 different scan vendors, the scanners have evolved tremendously over the years in terms of capabilities, going beyond security CVE plugins or signatures, like compliance scanning for regulatory controls, like for my example with the HIPAA regulations. And basically, these scanners are trying to attempt to get into the realm of, other regulatory requirements and basically going through a checklist. But sometimes that's just not enough. You don't know what's more important to prioritize, which vulnerabilities out of the 1,000 results that I should prioritize. So that leads us to the next area in our agenda. What is a penetration test? So I can tell you a penetration test in my own personal experience. You get a group of people together, mix skill sets, and attempt to infiltrate a target, right? That's that simple. For a period of time in my career, that's all I would do. I would come in to any agency, some corporations, run pen tests for a specific period of time. They are very locked down and the set of objectives that I'll go into, usually with different people on my team because we all had different skill sets, very small. Literally, sometimes I would go and do an assessment that was only 2, 3, 4 people, and that was it. And really, our determining factor was to find exploits based on the vulnerabilities that were discovered and try to get access to data. Application compromise, so can we get root access? Can we get a SQL injection? Can we infiltrate the system and have persistent shells and basically jump from one compromised system to another? And once we started harvesting credentials, then we test them on other applications and see if we could do things like pass the hash or something like that. So that's exactly what pen tests are for, right? Is to basically test the easiest way to get into a particular network. It's never the attackers going after the hardest target. They go after what's easy. So what am I getting at, right? How do I address running a pen test? So in this industry, you're going to hear about scoping, what's in target, prioritize, what are the systems that I should rank in priority, what are the systems that I should have for the particular pen test. Are they databases? Are they web front ends? Are they mobile devices? Are they infrastructure devices that connect to the entire enterprise for my backend, customer database or something like that? And then take the approach. How are we going to actually come into the systems? Are we going to attack your system from within the network, outside the network only, to determine the access path to the particular application and the data? So we take all of that information and we basically bundle that up and we talk about rules of engagement, when this should happen, what's allowed, what's not allowed. So things that maybe not allowed are like, don't run a denial service on my applications. The application owners are very sensitive. They don't want their applications impacted because 9 times out of 10, these pen tests are run in production, not in any test environment, not in a QA environment, but in live systems that the customer are actually interfacing with. So that's a realistic scenario as well. So then we get to step 4, right, which is the pen test itself. So take all the rules of engagement, run the pen test. That can take days because of limited staff. I mean, as I mentioned, sometimes I'm only with 2, 3, maybe 4 people. We have specialized skill sets. So maybe I'm running the web front end interrogation and trying to get SQL injections off the web front end. While the other guy, he's a database expert. So once I'm passing him some information over, he's trying to get into the database. And other times it's, my teammate, he's probably trying to get at it from a different point of view, and we're not even sharing data because we're at different locations, right? So he could be coming at it from, the West Coast, and I'm coming at it from the East Coast, and we're not even talking to each other, and we're just trying to get into the system. That's typically how the attackers work, right? They don't tend to talk to each other. They tend to try to get into the system. Once they have the information, then they're going to go to see how far they can go with the access of data. So after that, part of the pen testing process is to provide a report, exactly what information was gathered, what possible ways that we are able to infiltrate the network, and basically provide a guide to the customer, assigning risk for the findings based on what was exfiltrated. It could have been a low or medium score of vulnerability, but based on the output of the information, it should be high or critical to the enterprise, especially if I just gathered PII data or customer data from a database or the weapon plans for a UAV that I talked about at the beginning. So the report should have a step-by-step recipe to basically tell the system owners how to fix the issue, known as remediation. So after that, the most final step, what you should really do is work with the system owners, especially the pen test team, because these guys are the experts, and handhold some of the system owners on how to go about and fix their particular issues, and then schedule time to retest those systems to make sure those exposures are closed. Because guess what? The attackers will go after this information the exact same way that was done during the pen test. So this is a critical step, but nearly all the pen tests that I've ran, 8 out of 10 times, the retest doesn't take place immediately. It sometimes takes months to go back and retest the systems to make sure that they're patched. So in the pen testing topology, we talk about 3 ways to get into a system. So as a pen tester, there's unique approaches to getting into a particular environment. Primarily, and the best way to go after systems is the black blockers approach. this is the way that the attackers will go after. So they basically don't have anything prior knowledge. They'll go out and start gathering knowledge about the target they're after. The same thing as a tester. You probably don't want to share any information about the network environment or any of the applications. So once we do our basic discovery, and especially even sometimes leveraging some limited information from a vulnerability assessment, gathering maybe a basic list of, high or critical vulnerabilities, and see what we can find. The gray box approach is getting a partial knowledge of the network, right? Including some basic information about the actual system configuration, possibly some test credentials to basically probe what's on the actual systems, and maybe sometimes application configurations as well. And then you have the insider view, the white box, right? Which is basically a pen tester has complete in-depth understanding of the entire network environment. Sometimes this gives false, or sometimes to the managers, better results, but it's a false impression because I know everything about the environment already, so I'm going to go after the typical ways that I know because I have as much information that I could ever have, versus, from the outside view in, especially from black box, which is typically tested from an external network connection into the agency or the corporation. That's the approach that should be taken. So from all my hands-on experience, right, I basically safe to say there are 4 key differences between vulnerability assessment and pen testing. First is this discovery process. So how do we actually get into the systems? Is it based on vulnerabilities or basically exercising and gathering information to the particular system? The scalability and frequency of when these processes are actually ran, this is really completely different. The quality of the results, how much information is gathered and how can I sort through the information? And then, of course, the 4th step is how effective are the reporting and remediation that comes from these different processes. So there are obviously some pros and cons to both of these approaches, right, from the vulnerability assessment side and the pen testing side. And I'll go into those in more detail here. So typically, you have organizations that claim that they're doing pen testing, especially on the internal side. So they'll go off and get tools like Metasploit. They'll get, a framework attack system like Kali Linux and run a whole set of tools to go after a set of systems that they basically time box, and they say, okay, it takes 12 hours to basically run an assessment, and I'm going to use a couple of my tools to go after. Well, these tools are using known exploit processes that are already known both by the attackers, the security teams, the vendors, and sometimes you basically, all you can do is do a simulation. So some tools leverage simulating a user. That tool then runs a hacking script that's built specifically to go after a set of exploits, captures the output from the script, and then finds and exploits a particular vulnerability based on the output. And then you get a basic report finding that says, here, I did step 1, step 2, and step 3. This is the user, this is the script, and this is the vulnerability. Well, in the real world, what if a system owner just changed one particular setting of the application? The script won't work. So there's a huge disadvantage of basically using automated software programs. Then you have the human creativity, right? So like me on a team, or even myself individually coming in, looking at a particular system and trying to find some way to get into the particular box, right? So I'm going to use a set of tools to do my reconnaissance. I'm going to gather information, and I'm going to start enumerating and testing possible vulnerabilities. I don't care if they're low, medium, or high ranked based on some scanner output. I'm just trying to find any way to get in. I perform some attacks manually by looking at the output that I've gathered. I build some customized scripts that will probably work only on this particular target. I analyze the result of the attack, or I get my teammates to basically look into the output. We come up with additional ways to exercise the information that's found, We find different attack vectors. Hey, look at this. We found a shell on this particular box. Hey, and on that box, now we got a shell. We found a database. Let's go after the database and see if we can get access to the database. Great. The credentials that got us in the shell, it also works to get in the database. Great. They didn't use the same, they didn't change the same password. They're sharing the passwords all together. And then we're jumping from the database to the actual web application form. And then from there, we're getting access to the customer data and all the transactions, and we basically have what we want. So there we go. And basically, we find all that particular information. However, that length of time is a lot longer than using automated tools. So frequency, right? So one of the things I just talked about was the length of time. Vulnerability assessments, as I said earlier, I was working on a proof of concept with a federal agency that was huge network environment across the world. And then they basically wanted to scan on a weekly basis, and we had to basically reduce the window of scanning from 3 days to basically less than 12 hours. So we're able to basically work with the system owners and start automating monthly, weekly, or even daily scans. But pen tests, they're very different, right? It basically requires a lot of additional tuning, a lot of different rules of engagement, especially about, hey, during the pen test, I don't want you to do any social engineering review, and that's it. And by the way, the system owners are very sensitive, and we can only do it during this time at the end of the quarter, so it doesn't affect our operations. And oh, by the way, the CIO says, we only want to do this once a year, but that depends on budget, that depends on access to the systems, and even impacting the systems as well. So different schedules for both of these different processes. So machine versus human, right? Quality. What comes out of the particular assessments? So vulnerability assessments, right? The scanners that are leveraged, they scan for a lot of different vulnerabilities that could be on the particular systems. Scanners like Nessus and Qualys and Nexpose and Burp Suite, all these scanners, they have thousands, hundreds of thousands of plugins or scripts that will basically look for these particular vulnerabilities. This is definitely not mimicking human behavior at all. And the output is large volumes of findings, right? Often at the cost of any quality. So you don't know how these vulnerabilities map to your particular systems, how important they are. There's some basic asset mapping that you can do. A lot of times I hear agencies export all this data to another tool that they can just try to understand exactly what is coming out of the information overload. But then pen testing is not across, a large segment of your network. It's really specifically tailored for a specific objective. It's usually on a very small scale. And then the entire process is to mimic a realistic attack by the adversary, right? From the outside in, I'm gathering information from the outside, and the report output emphasizes accuracy, but is missing the bigger picture of the entire enterprise. This is maybe only one specific set of systems that work together to provide one service for my customer. Well, we've got to replicate that process across different parts of the enterprise. That takes different skill set, right? So vulnerability assessment versus pen testing, like I said, it requires different training, different thought level, different time of how to do these as well. That's why a lot of times pen testing, it's only done, quarterly, maybe half a year, maybe even yearly, because of the impact level to, adversely affecting other parts of the business, downtime, scheduling this particular set of objectives may impact actual production and access to the particular systems that are running. So reporting and remediation, right? These are basically all put out, like I said before. I'm just kind of trying to reiterate what we've talked about. But vulnerability assessment is bringing out a particular priority for internal business, right? They're not mapped to their particular needs. You basically have to customize dashboards. You have to customize the particular metrics and create some sort of business logic around thousands of results. But then how do you actually go about and starting closing these on a massive scale, because you're assessing really big environments, and especially on the network side versus pen testing, right? So the report that I like to always talk about is it's limited in scope, it's limited in visibility, but it's an immediate call to action, right? Everything inside of a pen test report should be followed up right away. It basically lists all the vulnerabilities that were successfully exploited. I was able to obtain information from the particular systems and gather what I needed to showcase, hey, this is exactly why you need to go back and fix these systems immediately. These are actually running currently in production, and the attackers can go after the exact same set of data. So are these processes really the same, right? It's a simple thing. The difference between I know I'm vulnerable to Drupal and a completely different thing to actually know that Drupal can be exploited, right? So if I'm vulnerable, I don't know the potential cost across all the systems. Maybe there's 150 or 200 systems that are vulnerable, but I don't know what those systems make up. I don't know what they actually contain. Do I need to focus all my time there? Or, the vice versa, when I do a pen test versus a scan, I know I'm vulnerable to Drupal. My system could be owned. We were able to exploit Drupal. And I need to prioritize this for remediation because we're able to access customer data. But are these processes enough? So in my view, we need a new approach. Traditional scanning is highly automated and a lot of failures in basically, how many people can actually address the information overload. So humans definitely, we can't scale. There's not enough budget to hire thousands of people to go through the hundreds of thousands of events that are generated by scanners. Then the other thing is machines can't think, right? So I've mentioned a few pen testing tools during this process. We have other organizations that use red teams, right? They basically either outsource that process or they have their internal red teams, but the teams are very small. They're far few between. If you try to schedule them, the pen testing takes often months at a time to be organized and actually ran. And basically, there's lack of time, training, and resources. So what is the next evolution in these testing criteria? Well, the new approach is crowdsourced security testing, right? Get the best of humans, the experts in their field, and leverage the best in AI and machine intelligence to basically help find the knowns and the unknowns without the environment. So security must evolve, right? Independent scanning and doing independent pen testing, that's been the approach for the last, say, 15 years or so in the security marketplace. It's been evolving. So the last few years, they're starting to happen with especially vendors, big corporations, especially places like Google. They're basically running responsible disclosure and open bug bounty programs to basically get more people involved in security, crowdsource, and get more people working together to basically find security issues in all kinds of systems. It could be IoT devices, it could be mobile devices, it could be network and server systems, storage systems, even specialized hardware, ICS, right? Industrial control systems, SCADA, so for power plants. A lot of that specialty has been developed from the traditional pen test methods, but they're far and few between, like I said. Then it's really evolved nowadays into managed vulnerability discovery, where crowdsource will find a whole new set of vulnerabilities, a lot of 0 days, work in tandem for good disclosure, and leveraging that process and bringing it towards the managed crowdsourced pen testing and basically blend the two together. So that's what we're talking about here. So Cynic has redefined how organizations conduct security testing. This is why I joined Cynic. Basically, I saw the gaps that I was working on in different programs, right? I've handled lots of different customer environments. I've been in places where, I saw that we needed more talent in the red team that maybe I was working with, or the team that I was consulting with, the on-staff is too small. They couldn't get all the information gathered and prioritized because it's just too much information for a team of 2, maybe 3 people. But that's the reality of today. With the traditional pen tests, Cynic uses a combination of man and machine, right? We have our own scanning platform called Hydra, and then we basically provide that information to our security platform that our researchers basically go through, and basically it scales. It has the ease of use and thoroughness unavailable through traditional alternatives, right? Every crowdsourced security test, we try to basically pair the best security researchers in the world with the best technology to provide an on-demand, scalable security testing environment. The red team brings the creativity, the diversity of the human mind with every test, and it's enabled us to basically provide our customers with scalable, automated scanning. That's the purpose of basically bringing this to the next level. Our platform provides rigorous trust and security protocols to give our customers complete visibility and control over the testing, even providing an overall trust with the results of the program. The reporting is basically something that I have never seen with other tools, which is here's exactly how we got into the environment. Here's the steps that you can reproduce step by step to basically take the report and do the test yourself, followed by the remediation. You can hand that report to a system owner. They basically can go through and fix a particular problem. All the results are delivered through what we call the client portal. The portal provides real-time analytics on what's being found. It has performance benchmarking and customer reports on demand. So as this is happening, you're getting results in real time. So it can help improve your instant response. It could help your defense measures all at once. And that's one of the big differences that I see with this type of testing. So crowdsourced for compliance, right, is a C-level view. So Cynic is leading the industry in using crowdsourced technologies and techniques for compliance-friendly testing. Now, during our product development, we created a new methodology for applying the best lessons of crowdsourcing to compliance testing. So it starts with analyzing the regulatory text, such as PCI, right? And we basically go through the FISMA controls as well, so 800-53. Does it call specifically for external pen testing or not? Is it explicit or less specific on best practices? Call out all those actions, all those texts, and basically we provide a universe of potential checks that are created in the platform, classified as an attack type, using the OWASP as the inspiration. Then each of those checks has to basically be play tested and refined with our researchers. Too much work and it doesn't get done. Too little and there's not enough evidence created for the final report. Is it clear? Is it appropriately scoped? It has to be mapped to our pricing and the skill composition of the crowd. And finally, these have to be distributed fairly to a skilled crowd that has to be trained on the process with the right hacking skill. And you get the best report that you can going through the compliance regulation requirement. So all these processes wrapping together need to be effective. We just don't help find and fix vulnerabilities. We also provide real-time intelligence through our client portal to help you reduce your security risk, especially from the outside. Effective. Augment and scale your team's efforts with unnecessary operational burden. Manage the operation so you can focus on the things that really truly matter. It's controlled. You decide how you want to activate the crowd, and you have clear visibility in all testing and full ownership of the findings. That's one of the key things about this testing environment, right? Every finding is owned by you as a customer. Nothing is disclosed. You then have the responsibility of disclosing it if there's 0 days with the vendors or with the particular application group, but it's all of your data. and you own it during this process. And basically, it's transformative, right? It's basically agile security lifestyle, integration to your security and development teams seamlessly so you can innovate the smart way and you can build systems on the fly while testing the systems on the fly as well. And the government is following suit, right? Basically, there was 9x agency adoption in 2017, 8 mentions of legislation of hack, Pentagon, hack the DHS, hack the VA, in 6 months. So this is a very current topic in the federal government, and there's a lot of initiative around doing crowdsourced security.